Will you pardon Paul Manafort?
I don't talk about that now. I don't talk about that now. I think the whole Manafort trial is very sad. When you look at what's going on there, I think it's a very sad day for our country. He worked for me for a very short period of time. But you know what? He happens to be a very good person. And I think it's very sad what they've done to Paul Manafort.
That's an example of what we're now going to begin talking about. And one point of order, Paul Manafort was chairman of the campaign. Again, one of several instances cited right there in the Mueller report where President Trump stopped short of ruling out a pardon for someone, in this case, Paul Manafort. Tonight, as part of our series we're calling Uncovered, diving into the parts of the Mueller report that haven't received yet wide news media coverage, we're going to take a closer look at what the special counsel team had to say about Trump and whether he was trying to signal or convince Manafort not to cooperate with the government. Manafort was found guilty in his Virginia trial August 21st last year. He then pleaded guilty to charges in Washington, D.C., both of them with the feds. He signed a plea agreement to cooperate with the feds. That agreement was later torn up after the feds established that Manafort had lied to them. Here's a portion of what the Mueller report says. Quote, there is evidence that the president's actions had the potential to influence Manafort's decision whether to cooperate with the government. The president and his personal counsel made repeated statements suggesting that a pardon was a possibility for Manafort, while also making it clear that the president did not want Manafort to flip and cooperate with the government. Now, we'll add an aside here. The Mueller report also mentions this exchange between Manafort and his former business partner, Rick Gates. Quote, in January 2018, Manafort told Gates that he had talked to the president's personal counsel, unidentified here, and they were, quote, going to take care of us. Manafort told Gates it was stupid to plead, saying that he had been in touch with the president's personal counsel and repeating that they should sit tight and will be taken care of. Gates asked Manafort outright if anyone mentioned pardons, and Manafort said no one used that word. A lot of that going on of late. For more on the pardon issue, let's bring in Nelson Cunningham, a former assistant U.S. attorney for the Southern District of New York, also happens to be former counsel of the Senate Judiciary Committee. Nelson, talk about the use, the dangling of pardons, which really only one person can do at the end of the day, as a vehicle to potentially obstruct justice.
Look, the president's power to pardon is in the Constitution. It's absolute. The Constitution places no limits on the president's power to pardon. Other than that, he may not pardon impeachments. Other than that, it is a power which is rested in the president. That does not mean, however, that the president cannot be called into question in other fora for the way he exercises that presidential pardon. For example, let's assume that somebody gave the president $2 million to pardon someone. Does anybody rationally think that that would not be a crime and that would not be wrong to accept a bribe to offer to pardon somebody? It's precisely the role of the Congress to look at the conduct of the president in the exercise of his powers and to see whether the exercise of those powers constituted an overreach. Clearly, in this case, it did.
I want to read for you something else. This is a little legalese. Folks at home, get comfy, and we'll try to go slowly. This is from the Mueller report. Many of the president's acts directed at witnesses, including discouragement of cooperation, i.e. don't flip, with the government, and suggestions of possible future pardons, occurred in public view. While it may be more difficult to establish that public-facing acts were motivated by a corrupt intent, the president's power to influence actions, persons, and events is enhanced, and here comes the important part, by his unique ability to attract attention through use of mass communications. And no principle of law excludes public acts from the scope of obstruction statutes if the likely effect of the acts is to intimidate witnesses or alter their testimony. The justice system's integrity is equally threatened. Nelson, if acts of wrongdoing are spoken in public in real time on Twitter while the helicopter awaits on the South Lawn, is it any less an act of wrongdoing because the skullduggery is not behind closed doors?
No, the legal words you've read make that clear from Mueller. But also, it's Donald Trump's MO. The more brazen he is, the more overt he is in his conduct, the more then later on he says, well, but you saw what I did there, didn't you? I did it publicly. That's the way that he lulls the system into acquiescing to what he does. Well, I may have talked about a pardon for Paul Manafort, but I did it on television. The point is, did Paul Manafort hear it? Did it shape Paul Manafort's behavior? And did Donald Trump say it intending to shape Donald Trump's behavior, Paul Manafort's behavior? And the answer is pretty clear, yes.
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.